Socialism, An Insight to Marxist Reform by Jeremy Edwards. Socialism can be defined as an economic system in which the production and distribution of goods are controlled substantially by the government rather than by private enterprise, and in which cooperation rather than competition guides economic activity. How has socialism affected our world? Now, let's give credit where credit is due. Charles Fourier was a French-born social theorist who advocated a reconstruction of society based on communal associations of producers known as phalanxes. His system came to be known as Fourierism, and also he was the creator of utopian socialism, which went on to inspire Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, after being inspired from various works, various socio-political activists from France and around the world would go on to create the Communist Manifesto. The Communist Manifesto, the literature which gave birth to scientific socialism, or communism, which was defined as a theory or system of social organization based on the holding of all property in common, actual ownership being ascribed to the community as a whole or to the state. Unfortunately, nowadays, it can be described also as a system of social organization in which all economic and social activity is controlled by a totalitarian state dominated by a single and self-perpetuating political party. Das Kapital was another great work written by Karl Marx. It is a pamphlet that dealt with the economic, social, and political relations within society and contained the tenets on which modern communism is based. It also predicted the fall of capitalism by way of socialism. It is also the handbook of the modern-day working class. Socialism is a grand ideology. There have been no countries or states geographically recognized by boundaries which have successfully implemented and maintained a socio-economic system that has been completely socialist. Although this ideology is not capable of being completely practiced at 100% purity, it has been attempted. Let's take a look at some of the dictators, or autocrats rather, who have made attempts throughout history in order to implement the Marxist reform in their countries completely. The Soviet Union by many has been depicted as a failed communist society, although that is still up for debate today. Russia is strong, no doubt, and still a world power. The men you see before you from left to right are Vladimir Lenin, Joseph Stalin, and Nikita Khrushchev. Mao Zedong was the leader of the People's Republic of China. As you can see here at the bottom right, this is the People's Republic of China prior to liberation movements in Tibet and Mongolia. China today is also another world power, especially in the region of Southeast Asia. Shown here is Ho Chi Minh, who was the leader of the North Vietnamese during the Vietnam War. Vietnam still exists today as a primarily Marxist country. Fidel Castro was the head of the Communist Party of Cuba. Cuba exists still today, but in a state of somewhat economic turmoil, due to a system of embargoes placed upon it by the United States after its revolution and attempts to regain its natural resources and instate a system of agrarian reform. The primary sphere of influence was the Soviet Union. As you can see here, there were a multitude of different countries and leaders within those countries which made attempts to establish Marxist reform on a global scale. But this was not acceptable to countries that were not interested in Marxist reform and were instead interested in capitalism, another socio-economic and somewhat successful, but yet not purely practiced, system. The socio-economic global schism, which was created from the push of capitalism against the push of the Soviet Union's sphere of influence on communism in other countries, would eventually lead to the Cold War. Now, of course, with war comes the propaganda. And this leads me to the bread and butter of my film. I'd like to discuss some of the stigmatic issues surrounding socialism. First, let's remove the idea that only capitalism supports individuality. Remember our definition for socialism. Remember that it does not include anything in there about individuality. As a matter of fact, how it's come to be practiced today by countries such as Denmark, Norway, Finland, Luxembourg, and Switzerland is that when we share the resources generated from state-owned goods, we're talking about the natural resources. Where does individuality come into play there? Nowhere. Another common stigma surrounding socialism is that without competition, the economy will become stagnant, that there will be no improvements, and thus there will be a downfall economically, leading to economic turmoil on a national scale. But that's not the case. Think about it. We witness it in nature all the time. We witness it in American society, especially during natural disasters. Collaboration is a very, very powerful tool. Why leave others behind when we can all advance together as a society? And finally, let's talk about materialism. Capitalism's underdog. Money, for example. What gives money value? Money is given value, that is, U.S. currency, is given value based on how much of it is in circulation on a global scale at any given time. Notice I didn't mention anything about any precious metals, diamonds, or anything close to that being used to regulate the value of U.S. currency. Our U.S. currency is the reserve currency of the world. Now, let's take a step back. Gold was used as a precautionary measure in order to regulate the value of any currency in the world. But let's go back further. And let's just keep in mind that natural resources are what decide which nation's currency is either more in value or less in value than the US dollar. So why be so materialistic? Why are we driven to have the newest phones? Why are we driven to have certain clothing items that are created by certain manufacturers? It should be quite obvious. It's just a choice. It's an engineered perception based on media and things we see in our daily lives that influence us to desire to have. Interestingly enough, we can't say this is purely capitalism, but simply a marketing scheme used by companies in order to generate revenue. Socialism does not remove this issue, yet it removes the idea that those of us who have less than others, given that we have the latest technological mobile device, laptops, clothing items, and accessories, we can somehow fit in. That's not the case. Socialism is a direct enemy to materialism, and rightfully so. While we here in America seem to do so well, others suffer on behalf of our economy's dominance. I'm not saying this to be anti-American, but simply to wake up those who are listening. Think about it. What makes you need something, or desire rather, something that is non-life essential? It's simply just that, a desire, imposed upon you by the influences of what you see on a daily basis. First off, let me end this by saying that capitalism and socialism are not enemies. They are two socioeconomic systems which we use today in order to improve our own U.S. economy and are also used by other nations around the globe. Remember to question. Remember that when you form an opinion, you should form an opinion based on facts and not based on emotions, not based on what you hear. Stigmas are the enemy for those who wish to make educated opinions, and decisions as to where they should head in life and what they should believe and support. The radical idea of sharing your nation's resources so that the commonwealth is optimal and that people can pursue their own goals as individuals, well, there's nothing wrong with that. This concludes my presentation. My name once again is Jeremy Edwards, and thank you for watching.